Hi, and welcome to the final in this current series of preparing for the Tomb of Sargeras. It's intended for people who want to step up the level of raiding as we enter the new raid tier 20 Tomb of Sargeras. You may, for example, have just been doing LFR and you want to do some organised normal raiding. Maybe you've been doing normal and you want to do some heroic. Maybe that's what you've been doing and you really want to be doing Mythic raiding in Tomb of Sargeras, or maybe you've just been doing a few bosses on Mythic and you really want to be pushing for that cutting edge achievement. So in this final episode we're going to be looking at survivability. Survivability is really important if you want to progress on a boss. Obviously you cannot kill a boss if you're all dead, and when you're learning a fight you don't expect to kill a boss on the very first pull, apart from maybe the very first ones. So what you need to do is you need to start and learn more of the fight. So you try and last half a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And the way you see more of the fight is by staying alive for it. We don't want any silly deaths. Now, according to a poll of experienced raiders, the most common cause of death apparently is having your health reduced to 0. So how are we to combat this problem? First of all, we should consider the main general reasons why you might take excessive damage. One reason is being stood in bad. Fire spawns under you, or just happened to be there and you walked into it and you're not aware of it, and you slowly have your health removed. Maybe you had some damage taken from something else which put you on low health, then you've landed in something like fire, and that's finished you off. Another way is getting mugged. In other words, some adds come into the fight and they aggro onto you for some reason. A third reason can be heavy raid-wide damage. This happens on a number of fights and it's one of these things that requires coordination within the raid to deal with. Maybe you take heavy personal damage. Occasionally, boss encounters involve heavy amounts of damage just going on to a select few people. It may well be a failure. It could be a failure to dodge a mechanic. For example, the wall on Cordana Fellsong at the end of Vault of the Wardens. It could be a failure to soak something, such as on Elisand. It could be a failure to interrupt a very powerful ability. It could be a failure to kill a priority add in time. These crop up quite frequently on boss encounters. The most common example in Nighthold would have been the adds from the Burning Pitch on Croesus. Now, the solution to some of these things, well, first of all, a lot of these problems go away if you have a well-designed UI so you can actually see what you're doing, as well as boss timers so that you know when stuff is going to happen. This has already been covered earlier in the series, however. Now, for being stood in something you shouldn't, you might, as well as making sure the area around you is clear so you can see it, consider an add-on GTFO. Sometimes it has to be said that the areas of fire or fell or shadow or whatever it is that's harmful to you does not necessarily contrast well with the ground. In a situation like this, this add-on creates an audible warning whenever you're stood in anything harmful. If a situation is arising where adds are coming into a fight and aggroing onto non-tanks or people who are not intended to be taking that damage, then of course this requires raid coordination. It may well be that hunters should misdirect to the tanks. However, let's say that there's been a bit of difficulty here and you're still getting mugged by these adds. What can you personally do about it? Of course, what you can do is you could use a personal damage reduction cooldown. You could use a stun on them. Most adds into a fight are stunnable and then move away, potentially putting the tank between you and those mobs, so it's physically got to run past the tank to get back to you, in which case if it does that, blimey, get a new tank. When it comes to heavy raid-wide damage, the usual tactic here would be to coordinate and get the raid to move close together and then use short-range AoE cooldowns such as Darkness from Demon Hunters, maybe a Spirit Link Totem from a Shaman. You should also, however, be aware that on some fights this raid-wide damage may be occurring at various times and it's not feasible to have everyone stacked throughout the fight. Be aware of where healers are placing their AoE healing effects and make sure that where possible you are stood in them for extra healing. When it comes to heavy personal damage, this might be a Seeker Swarm on Tichondrius as an example. You definitely need to use a personal cooldown. You may also need to request an external cooldown from a healer or any other player that can deliver this. Again, this is the sort of thing that may need to be coordinated and discussed. Definitely what you want to do at the end of every pull, if you died, and it wasn't dying after the wipe was called, you should identify what it was that killed you and take steps to make sure it does not happen again. Bear in mind, the damage that actually finished you off is not necessarily what killed you. For example, let's say you take damage that deals 90% of your health. Well, you were still alive. And then let's say you just took some damage from something more innocuous and it did the rest of the 10%. It's not the damage that did the 10% of your health that killed you. It was the one that did the 90%. So you need to quickly identify, was there something wrong with your positioning? Did someone, including yourself, fail to deal with a mechanic, whether it be a soak, an interrupt, killing a priority ad, dodging a mechanic? Was it that you took heavy, unavoidable damage, but you didn't have a cooldown available? In which case you need to decide to yourself, why didn't I have a cooldown available? Had I used this at a time when I didn't really need it? Or am I going to need to ask for something in that situation? So I'll repeat what I said at the start of the video. The key to making rapid progress on any boss fight is to make sure that people stay alive for as much of it as possible. People tend to try and focus more on output, whether it be healing or whether it be DPS, than they do on mechanics a lot of the time. And the problem with this is you have a very high chance of dying. And the other issue is, let's say you don't die, you might go for 10 pulls and not die. It might just be, but you were lucky and the abilities weren't targeting you. And then 10 pulls later, they do target you and you die to them because you haven't been learning anything, because you've just been focusing on DPS or on padding the healing meters. Remember the golden rule in raid progress: there is no such thing as a DPS check until you meet it. So when people say, oh no, we need to be able to beast this phase down in 2 minutes flat, or otherwise we're in trouble, until you hit the 2 minute mark, you don't know whether you're able to do that DPS or not. So actually the first priority is do mechanics. Everyone should focus entirely on mechanics. If you get to that 2 minute mark and you've not done enough damage by then, that's the point at which you say, okay, now we need to up the damage. But also by then, because all of you will have been focusing on the mechanics, you will all have a much better idea of how to deal with them and do DPS at the same time. Remember, when you start a new encounter, you already know how to do DPS. If you're a raider, you should already know how to play your class. You're not learning how to play your class any better by doing a different encounter. Doing a different encounter, what you need to learn is the mechanics, and you can only learn the mechanics by focusing on them. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you found the entire series useful. If you did, don't forget to subscribe for further content. The next series will be on using Warcraft logs. Also share with other people who may be interested, and until next time, I'll see you later and good luck in the Tomb of Sargeras.